And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flight categories for tomorrow morning should look like this. IFR, northern Bering Sea, one area extending down to the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, bigger area extending down across the areas from Atka Island westward out to Kiska and Shimia, and then northward there through the Bering Strait and up in along the Yukon Delta coast. VFR in the interior here from the Brooks Range on down toward the White Mountains. Start picking up some marginal VFR south of there, especially when you get into the Alaska Range area. Southward into the Gulf of Alaska, Kodiak Island eastward into the Panhandle. Some IFR here over the southeastern Copper River Basin and areas of the inside waters of the southeast coast. For the afternoon, marginal VFR with some possible areas of VFR breaking out over the southeast coastal areas. Marginal conditions, Gulf of Alaska, right on up North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound area, Copper River Basin, and up along the Alaska Range, increasing VFR for Cook Inlet into the southern Susitna Valley, and then out to the west and north, all the way up to the Arctic coast there. And a lot of IFR still out over the Bering Sea, extending down here to the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, Nunivak Island down across the Pribilofs, as well as the west central Aleutians. And then for the Thursday morning forecast, not much change out here, just the IFR kind of shifting around, but still a narrow band extending down to the Alaska Peninsula. Northern Bering IFR right through the strait, but off the northwest coast. And a lot of IFR here from the Kulski all the way out to Shimei and Attu. And then VFR southwest interior up and north of the Alaska Range. And for the Alaska Range down to the Copper River Basin, looking pretty marginal there, as well as for the southeast coast. And for the afternoon, big improvement here, going VFR for the Panhandle up to Yakutat. Improving also here over the southeast interior, south and east of the Alaska Range, with some lingering marginal VFR through the afternoon. Pretty good conditions here in the western interior from Bristol Bay on up to the Arctic coast. And a little bit less in the way of some IFR here over the Bering Sea, but pretty well entrenched over the central and western Aleutians and areas right on up through the Bering Strait there. And starting to graze areas from Kivalina to Point Hope. And for passes, Brooks Range, go with another VFR forecast for Anatuvik and Adigan tomorrow. Might be a little lower, especially early on the northern approaches of both those passes. Lake Clark and Merrill, mostly marginal. Same forecast for rainy, marginal VFR, windy as well. Isabel, all the way around the Alaska Range, looks pretty marginal tomorrow. And for Tanita, same forecast, marginal VFR. Portage, marginal VFR. Chilkoot and White, call it VFR. And for the freezing levels here, about, well, the warmest air, central northern interior, you can see 10,000 feet there, up around the central Arctic coast, down to about Point Lay, and then 8,000 feet in the central interior, then dropping off to about 4,000 feet or so here, right along the North Gulf coast, down across the Panhandle, out over the Bering Sea, 4,000 feet in the northern areas, 8,000 feet plus down toward the Aleutians. And for icing, frontal system pushing some considerable moderate rime icing into the western Aleutians as far east as at least Amchitka Island by tomorrow afternoon. Icing free to the east of that. Another area of possible significant icing here over the Copper River Basin, extending down into the maybe the Manuska Valley, Talkeetnas, into the southern Susitna Valley. Could be considerable moderate icing there as well. Otherwise, isolated moderate here from Dillingham, King Salmon, up across the Kuskokwim Valley, Cook Inlet, and most of the Copper River Basin. And from there, looking at the 33,000 foot wind flow with the warm air, upper high pressure here to the north, and cooler air, low pressure down to the south. It's giving this easterly flow pretty good band here, 65 knots, right along the North Gulf Coast across southern Alaska, a weaker one up there near and just south of the Brooks Range. Otherwise, we've got west turning northwest winds here across the Bering into the Aleutian, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, 75 to 85 knots, pretty light over the southeast coast. And pretty light winds at 9,000 feet over areas from the Arctic coast down into the Gulf, across the Panhandle. And then we've got 35 knot southeast winds there across St. Lawrence Island, and southerlies about 35 there, head of that next system over the western Aleutians. 3,000 feet, east winds 30 knots along portions of the central Arctic coast. Light over the interior, light in the Bering Sea, increasing winds with that system there southwest or south-southwest of Shimia, with the strongest winds still remaining to the south of the western Aleutians throughout the day. Pretty light and variable there across the Gulf, actually the northeast Pacific, on into Canada. Turbulence with those gusty east winds, possible light to isolated moderate turbulence there for the central and eastern Arctic coast, surface 5,000 feet. And then probably pretty good, considerable moderate turbulence there coming into the western Aleutians there from, let's see, Kiska Island westward